Hello again, and welcome to the 365 Retirement Podcast with the team at Rubino & Lang Wealth Partners. My name is Randy Cook, here each week with the guys as we talk through some of the issues that you might be thinking about, you might be concerned about, you might be wondering about. We're here to answer those questions here on the podcast. And today, Ryan Marston is here, one of the partners at Rubino & Lang Wealth Partners. Ryan, how are you doing today?
Always a pleasure to be here with you, Randy. Excited to talk about these topics. Lots of questions nowadays, lots of things to be concerned about nowadays. So kind of laundry list full of things.
Certainly is. And so we're going to be talking about, I've been doing different stories about how long people are working for a very long time. And we now see numbers where people actually are working into their 70s. And actually the biggest group of people in the workforce that is growing are people in their 70s. So I don't know if that's because they want to work or because they have to work. So those are two issues right there. But we're going to actually talk about the other side of this today, because people think of the words early retirement. What is really early retirement? And so I have some numbers here from Motley Fool, and they found that half of Americans are retired by the age of 61. Another 25% are out of the workforce by age 64. So even though there are a lot of people working into their 70s and later, most people are out of the workforce before 65. So if you think, oh, I'm going to retire early because it's 65, you're actually right with everybody else, Ryan. So what do you see when people walk in? What are their ages?
I was caught off guard a little bit by those numbers that, right when I was reading the article. And to me, early retirement is before, there's no set age, right, on early retirement, but it was that pre-65 time frame. And for me personally, when I'm talking to clients, it has to do with one of the biggest factors of early retirement is healthcare costs, right? Okay. But no, recently, and we'll get into that, but recently I think I have had the discussion more frequently with people in their early 60s, maybe late 50s, about early retirement. Is it feasible to, can I justify retiring at 60 or 62, given everything else going on, whether it's Social Security benefits, healthcare costs, the current investments or savings that I have to my name in terms of retirement assets, and is it feasible? But there is certainly things that you have to be aware of retiring at 60 or 62, more so than at 65 plus, right?
So as somebody runs their numbers, and I would imagine there's a little bit of curiosity, somebody comes in at 62 and says, well, I was thinking about 65 or 66, but can I go at 62? And then you run the numbers, and the answer is yes, you can. Do people actually walk away from work at that point, or do they go kind of, you know what? I can go anytime I want to now, and maybe I will keep working. Yeah. What do you see there?
What's funny is I've had that situation a handful of times, and I'll run a plan for that person at 65. I'll run a plan for that person at 62. And then what we do is really compare the differences, right? What the situation at 62 looks like versus 65 in terms of asset level and projecting out in the future, 10, 20, 30 years down the road, because that's when it's important. Not, you don't want to retire early and make the mistake of running out of assets 20 years down the road, can't go back into the workforce at that point in time, right? But once we go through the exercise and let's say both look great, they have the ability to retire early, I say the ball's in your court now. You can work because you want to work, not because you have to work, right? It's a great situation to be in, but I think 9 times out of 10, that person continues to work.
Interesting.
Which is interesting, right? They thought they wanted to retire, but now they just can't take that next step to retirement, early retirement, so to speak. Or it's just a different mindset going into work every day, knowing you can leave on your own accord as opposed to having to be there to live or to fund your retirement.
You can play the take this job and shove it card anytime you want to.
Absolutely. And I think that changes people's outlook of stepping through the door at work every day, right?
Right.
So, it's good. And it's certainly something you want to review, both situations and what the differences are or shortfalls, if any, on that early retirement. But you got to, there's a lot of things you got to account for at early retirement that you don't necessarily have to at retirement or full retirement age.
So one of the interesting things about reading any story about retirement is in the comment section. And, people, say, okay, here's what's going on with me. And I saw one of those just recently, and a person retired. It was he and his wife. He's 55, she's 54. And so they decided to retire. And so he said, our number one cost is healthcare. We're trying to get to Medicare. And so for them, it was $15,000 a year. So obviously they're going on Cobra or they're doing something. They're going
Yeah.
to the marketplace. They're getting some coverage. But this is probably your biggest expense and something you really have to work through and think about if you're going to be retiring before 65.
Absolutely. So for that couple, like you said, you can go on Cobra for 18 months and then private pay after that. But that's going to be a big chunk of years, decade plus for the 54-year-old till you get to Medicare age, right? In 15, I've heard as high as 20,000 for a married couple in terms of cost of insurance pre-65. That's got to be a part of your retirement plan for the next 10, 11 years. And then, healthcare may change a decade down the road, but, you can scale back. And then you're on Medicare, you have maybe supplemental or Medigap or Medicare Advantage. And that cost shrinks from, let's say, $20,000 to $8,000 to $10,000. There's still going to be a cost for healthcare at 65 plus, but it dramatically decreases. But that's got to be a part of your expense budget, your projections on seeing if it's feasible for you to retire at the age you want to retire, early retirement.
And one of the good things about that, I would imagine you kind of look forward to the day that goes away because you can go into Medicare and it's not probably better coverage, but it's also much less expensive. But so now let's talk about one of the other issues that people might think about is once you get to 62, you are eligible for Social Security. If you decide to go before 50 or 65, this is an issue. Do I, maybe your full retirement age is 66 or 67. You hear everybody say, wait till 70, you'll get your biggest check. But now you're in need of income, especially for that healthcare reason. Do you pull the trigger on Social Security early?
Yeah, and everyone's situation is very different in terms of maybe certain circumstances do actually make sense to start collecting at 62. Health is a big factor there, right? If you take Social Security at 62 versus full retirement age, call it 67, that break-even point is around 78. Right. So that at age 78, it wouldn't have made sense to actually start collecting at age 62. So if you have longevity, good health, it might make sense to still defer, even though you're retiring early, but defer Social Security because as soon as you trigger it at 62 or 63, that's permanent, right? So you're taking a permanent reduction of Social Security benefits, versus your full retirement age, which is continuing to grow at 8% per year.
So then that's put pressure, though, on the rest of your assets. If you do what you say and you say, okay, let's push that out. I'll take my Social Security at 66 or 67, my full retirement age. Now I got to say, I got to look elsewhere for the income that I need. Now it's 401k time. Now we're dipping into our money earlier than what we thought, and that could be a problem too.
It absolutely could be, right? It's short-term versus long-term problem, right? If you're looking at drawing from 401k or retirement assets to kind of gap you to triggering Social Security later down the road, that might be a short span that actually alleviates the pressure in the bigger chunk of years of retirement, 20 plus years with good longevity. So, the other factor is it depends on your tax situation. What bracket are you in? Well, it actually might make sense to draw from your 401k in the early years. You're going to be in a favorable tax bracket, if you don't have the other income coming in too. So that plays into consideration. Social Security in general is a huge factor within early retirement because, you're looking at your Social Security projections all those years. Well, your Social Security projections are going to change if you're retiring at 55. They're factoring in future contributions where it wouldn't be the case if you're retiring early, right? So, you want to make sure you have figured out what your Social Security would be if you're retiring at 55 with no more earned income years of putting into the Social Security system. Well, that's going to change what it would be at 62, 65, full retirement age, or 70 for that matter. So you want to make sure you have an accurate gauge on what the Social Security amounts would be.
So many times we look at that big number that's in our 401k. We look at that big number that we're going to get in Social Security, but we really need to be looking at monthly numbers, don't we? Because that's really the key here is what's coming in per month.
It comes down to, I have the conversation all the time. The plan is only as good as data in, right? And the number one thing that I start with is expenses and making sure your expenses are as accurate as possible. And then from there, we look at your income amounts. And if you're, if you have a shortfall or a surplus for that matter, if you have a shortfall, how big is the shortfall? How are we going to gap it? What your projected income versus expenses are. Investments, do you have pensions, Social Security? Does annuity make sense to gap the shortfall in income? So we look at all the circumstances and try to, gap it if there is a shortfall. If there is a surplus, then, great. Then we have a surplus. How long does a surplus last for? Factoring in inflation. Inflation is going to be a big factor within your expenses if you're retiring in 55 and, for the next, going to be retired for potentially 20, 30 plus years, right? Your expenses today are not going to be your expenses in 20 years from now. Those will be significantly higher. So you want to make sure you factor in those types of things. But all of those things kind of pool into making that consideration. And you just want to make sure you have all the tools kind of weigh through your options before you make the choice of early retirement.
And we talk about, when should you see a financial advisor? Obviously right before retirement, a lot of people do that. But at the same time, I think that this could be a really good meeting if you're thinking about retiring early, come in early, because we talk about making sure you have the income that you need. But Ryan, I would think there's a few things that you could maybe chip away at as far as debt is concerned to get some of that stuff off the table before you pull the trigger on retirement. Getting rid of a mortgage and a couple of car payments and credit cards and all that kind of stuff, that puts you in a better position.
100%. I get the question. When is too early? When's the right time? I don't think there really is a too early, so to speak, right? Because it's not always just about your retirement account, your investments. You said debt. That's if you can chip away at this and put you in a better spot to retire early, well, you have more, the earlier you sit down with someone to realize that, the more years you have to chip it away at the debt. Maybe savings. Maybe you got to get a savings buffer level up, higher without earned income coming in when you retire. You want to get it to a level that you're going to be comfortable with through retirement. So, again, earlier you sit down with someone, the more years you have to actually put that together and put that in the right situation. So, there's no really too early. Sitting down with someone, the more years you have ahead of retirement, the more years you have to impact the retirement, and more often than not for the better.
I was golfing this past weekend, and a woman I was golfing with, she's about 75, 76 years old, and we were talking about retirement. She says, I went at 70. Should have gone earlier. Because she's really enjoying herself.
I'm sure she is, yeah.
Yeah. You get out there to about 61, 62, 63 years old, and you start to talk to people who are in retirement, and you start to think about it, and you go, I wonder if I could. Well, really, Ryan, there's no other way to know unless you sit down and run the numbers, and it's a free meeting, and just sit down and let's go through it.
Absolutely. You got to go through the numbers, determine if it's feasible. If it's not, when is feasible. So you have mentally you can prepare yourself for that, right? It doesn't hurt to sit down and just go over, review the exercise, the retirement plan, and see what type of situation you're in, right? And then maybe it is attainable, and then you can start planning for it or reacting to what the plan says and making the adjustments needed to make it feasible.
Well, if you want to have that kind of a meeting, give us a look at Rubino & Lang Wealth Partners. You can find us online at 365retirement.com. We have show notes here for you, and we encourage you to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week here on the 365 Retirement Podcast.
Ryan Marston and John Conley are investment advisor representatives of Brookstone Wealth Advisors, LLC, a registered investment advisor. Exposure to ideas and financial vehicles discussed should not be considered investment advice or recommendation to buy or sell any financial vehicle. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Investments can fluctuate and when redeemed may be worth more or less than when originally invested. Investment financial professionals are not licensed in all 50 states. To find out if Sam Lang is licensed in your state, please call 617-630-8787. Rubino & Lang Wealth Partners is not affiliated with nor endorsed by the Social Security Administration or any other government agency and does not provide legal or tax advice. Annuity guarantees rely solely on the financial strength and claims paying ability of the issuing insurance company. By contacting us, you may be provided with information about insurance and annuity products offered through Rubino & Lang Insurance Agency, LLC, Massachusetts Insurance License number 1783398.